persons voting when they were not on the list, every single one that came to my attention turned out to be illegitimate, turned out to be false, and it forms part of that misinformation that we have been speaking about leading up to these elections. And it is unfortunate that persons who are participating in this process have had to resort to that kind of behavior. Very, very unfortunate. Yeah, sorry, you go ahead.
I was going to say, is it too early to confirm free, fair, and credible?
Based on what I have seen today, thus far, there has been no major incident which has caused me to question the process. And that is as much as I'd say at this point. Because, of course, I have not had the benefit of 100% of the reports or a universal report from throughout the country. There were a couple of other incidents in relation to the placing of the situation of the polling stations and stuff.
The voting compartment?
Yeah. The ones I have seen didn't really jump out at me. I must confess I got a couple of queries about it, but that was about it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Welcome. Have a good evening.
Commissioner of the Guyana Elections Commission, Mr. Seysgan Rajdir, speaking to us, providing a recap of his observations throughout the 12 hours of polling across the country here in Guyana for the 2025 general and regional elections. Of course, giving us a preview of his anticipation for what will happen now that polls have closed across the country. Agents of the Guyana Elections Commission will be moving into counting those ballots at polling places, putting together the statements of polls, and then moving that to the office of the returning officer, where there will be a more elaborate tabulation process before GCOM can move ahead with declaring the results of these elections. I'll hand you back now to Neil in studios as we continue our live coverage.
Thank you very much, Kurt. Kurt will be heading over to the Media Center of the Guyana Elections Commission, where they're expected to brief the media on polling day activities and perhaps give us a better sense of how these results will be counted, eventually tabulated and declared. Earlier, we spoke with some voters, as we did all day, on the election process and what it was like for them. So we can bring you the last of the comments that we had from voters.
My name is Randolph Critchlow, and I must say that the voting process was quite smooth. I went in and there was nobody there actually. My surprise when I came out, there are a number of persons lined up. So it seems as though persons are coming for the afternoon rush, because we've gotten some reports about slow or low voter turnout. So I think a lot of persons are now going to be coming out between the next 2 hours, in the next 2 hours to cast their ballot. So it was quite smooth actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to the younger generation that most of them are undecided about coming to actually cast the ballot? Give them some advice to come out and vote.
No, this is the one thing that you can do outside of complaining. So, I often say that you lose your right to complain if you don't take up this right and this that it is to vote. And so you can spend the next 5 years complaining about the government and what they're doing and whether or not you like them or not. But if today you choose to sit down, I really don't want to hear it. I really don't want to hear it. So as a young person out there, if you are thinking about making a difference and putting your mark to make that difference, today is the day. Today is the day. It takes less than a minute. Less than a minute to actually vote and go put your vote in the ballot box and ink your finger. There's some instructions that you'll follow that the GCOM agents who are very professional, they take you through, so it's nothing difficult. So I encourage them, come out and be a part of this process.
My name is Lamar Metahoza. The voting process is very easy. When you enter the ballot room or where you're voting, give your ID card to one of the assistants. They will give you your ballot paper. Remember, when you're voting, do not let your X jam the line or the cup. And basically that's it. It was nice.
With regards to the process, I think it went real smooth for me because I am in, and within the space of now 3 minutes, 4 minutes, I'll be out. And there were no complications inside of there, and I think it is something being done, everybody just pulling their weights, doing what they need to do. And I like the idea that they are smiling. Yeah. It's not like, we come under heavy pressures, whatever will happen. People are smiling. People are doing everything that they need to do. And I feel good about that, and I compliment them on that.
All right, thank you.
You have a great afternoon.
You too.
The procedure was easy, simple. First, when you go into the polling station, you will be met by the officers them, and they will check your the ID card, and they basically will direct you where to go. Just want to thank all who don't come out and vote. And let the election be peaceful and so forth.
Now, for today's elections, there have been several observers looking at the process. They included local observers as well as international observers. The main local observer group was the Private Sector Commission, and the main international observer mission was the European Union, which fielded over 50 observers. There are also observers from the Carter Center and the Organization of American States. We can bring you those comments from the heads of those missions as we await a press conference by the Guyana Elections Commission.
Good morning. My name is Jason Carter. I'm the chair of the Carter Center, and I'm the leader of this Carter Center election observation mission here in Guyana. It's a great honor for us to be here to observe the Guyanese people as they select their leaders. And as we know, the Carter Center has been here for many, many elections in this country, and we are honored again to be here. This morning we sent observers into the polling stations in every single region. And this evening we'll have people in every single tabulation center for the next couple days. And so we feel excellent about our team that's come in, and of course there's a consortium of other international observers that are also here. So we've been coordinating with them as well, and we've had the opportunity to meet with the leadership of a number of the political parties and to be here. Although we have a limited mission, we've been here for some weeks to observe the pre-election process, and we'll be here through the tabulation process. So far, our observers have been well treated, and we are excited about this day. We're not going to draw any conclusions, of course, until after the day is over and then after the tabulation process is complete. We do plan to issue a preliminary statement on Wednesday, September 3rd, where we can reflect on the election day and the tabulation process through then, and then we'd issue a full report once we have a chance to really compile all of the information and observe the full process to its completion. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer some questions if anyone has any.
Any issues so far? Any reports of any issues at polling stations?
No, one of the things that's very important for all of us is that we want to make sure we are drawing conclusions based on evidence and not based on rumors. So when we hear things, we try to go see with our own eyes what's happening. So we have thus far only had limited reports even of good things, right? So we haven't had a chance to observe any rumors, but so far so good. It's 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning. So, but we expect that today will be a smooth process. Again, our goal is to observe the entire process and then make comments. But also the key to this day is to make sure that everybody in the country is making decisions and conclusions based on evidence and not just rumors.
How many observers Carter Center is fielding?
We have approximately 40 observers, and then coupled with the other international observers, that's a good number of observers. And again, we'll be in every single region, and we'll have all of the tabulation centers covered. And our observers are going to be moving around throughout the day in each of the regions so that we'll have good coverage, we think, throughout the country. And of course, if we hear rumors or reports, we have the opportunity to go and check out some of those potential issues.
In your pre-election report, you expressed concern about, not concern, but called on GCOM for it to detail the tabulation process. Are you satisfied with the explanation given by the Chief Elections Officer, Mr. Vishnu Prasad, detailing that process?
So look, at the end of the day, the law is the law, and the legal framework is provided by this country itself. And so we can make our commentary as it goes, but we've had a great relationship with GCOM. They've been open to us, and they have listened in a variety of contexts to the issues that we've identified, and we feel good that all of the parties are going to be present for the tabulation process. The parties understand well the rules. GCOM's staff understands well the rules, and so we believe that we have no reason to think it's not going to be a smooth process.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to this press point. And it's a very important day for Guyanese democracy, and I'm very proud that European Union's election observation mission is present here during this E-Day, and I want to wish you all the best for that. As you all know, today we as European Union Election Observation Mission, we have 50 observers observing the elections in many villages and towns all across Guyana, in all regions. Our observers are present today observing this important part of Guyanese democracy. We are gathering information and, as you know, observing the elections. And with this, we are present from the very early morning during these elections, witnessing not only the opening of the stations across the regions, but also we will be present during whole process until this process ends. So we will be we witness the opening. Now we are observing the voting process, but we will be also at the tailoring and transmitting the information. We also, while collecting this information, we are transmitting our findings to our statistical hub, a special hub which we established here in Georgetown, where we gather all the information. You can imagine with 50 observers who are very active observing these elections in many parts of Guyana, we collect a lot of information. And this information is collected within our statistical hub here in Georgetown. This will give us a very clear picture from the voting process from all the regions of the country. We are really very well prepared. I just remind you, this is the biggest compoundment of the observers which observe these elections. It's 50 of us. And we are also being equipped with our specialists on different fields, also analyzing all the gathered information. This morning, as some of you witnessed, I was also observing the opening process in one of the polling stations here in Georgetown, and I will continue visiting the polling station throughout the days. I just visited, I think, the fourth or the fifth one, where the elections are going on. In the evening, together with other observers around the country, will follow the process of tabulation in all regions of Guyana to have also, again, a comprehensive picture. I would like to stress something what is very important, and it's worth to stress again. We are here to observe the elections. We provide impartial, factual reports which are very valuable, I believe, for this country. Our presence aims to contribute to a better understanding of the electoral. We are, and over time, support its improvements. This is something we very much value all across the globe, that we believe in these democratic processes which is also Guyana part of. We are here not to interfere in any processes. I want to stress it very hard, but we are witnessing and sharing the finding in transparent and very professional manner. On behalf of our mission, let me say something very important, which you as fans and the nation, Guyanese nation, deserve very well. We want to wish you a peaceful and joyful election day. It's very important for us to say it, because we are here for a while already, for quite a long, and we really keep fingers crossed for the peaceful and joyful election, a day to celebrate democracy, a day where voters are able to make their free and well-informed choices through casting their vote to the ballot. Finally, I would like to invite you all for our press conference, which will be held 3rd of September at 11 o'clock in Pegasus, where we will show our preliminary findings of the elections, and after that, in 2 months, we will have full report with recommendations. But this press conference on 3rd of September will be the first comments on the electoral process in Guyana. And I want to thank you for coming today. And if you have any questions, I'm for your disposal now.
What did you think about the 4 places you visited since morning? What can you say about the processes there?
Well, I cannot comment, Madam, on now. We are collecting the information, we are observing. So while the process is going on, our mandate, and you understand that very well, does not allow us to comment on that. But we are gathering information, we are collecting information. It's very detailed, our forms are very detailed. So you will be informed about anything what's going on and anything we observe. So there will be more information provided when all the voting process is finished.
The OS teams are on the ground in 7 of the 10 divisions, regions. And so far since morning, we have been able to visit 342 polling stations. We're going to be continuing that effort, and we'll be visiting more polling stations as the day progresses. Our observations are that, by and large, things have been moving smoothly. All of the polling stations that we visited, with the exception of one, opened promptly on time, and that one had a difficulty because when they started out, they didn't have the screen for the polling compartment. But that was quickly corrected, and they got the polling station going. All of the required polling officials, the presiding officer, the assistant presiding officer, the poll clerk, the ballot clerk, all of them were in place. All the materials that were required, with the exception of the one I just mentioned, were in place. So generally, we were satisfied that the polling exercise started out, and up to the last visit that we made and the last report that we got, everything has been proceeding in an orderly fashion. I was particularly impressed. I myself visited 62 of those 342 polling stations since morning. And I was particularly impressed at how professional, how well trained the polling officials appeared to be. They knew what they were doing. They were not hesitant in applying the relevant rules and guidelines. And all told, things have been going well. There's one little discrepancy that we saw, and I'm not sure if I should call it a discrepancy. In some polling stations where we visited, the polling compartment, the screen, was fixed in such a way that it faced the wall, so that you couldn't see from outside how a voter voted.
In some of the polling stations, we noticed that it was the opposite, where it was turned around. And when I inquired why that was so, I gather it was in relation to this effort to prevent voters from photographing their ballots. So it was put in such a way that the officials and the party agents would be able to see whether anybody was, fiddling with a smartphone. I don't blame that on the presiding officers. There seemed to have been some lack of clarity in the instructions that they were given. But certainly the instances that I observed, once a person went there with their back to everybody else, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to see how the person voted. So I believe that where that occurred, it was more out of an abundance of caution rather than any attempt to circumvent the process. At all of the polling stations that we visited, there were party agents in place. In most cases, at least 3, and in some cases more, so that the parties seem to have been quite vigilant in ensuring that they had, the ability to scrutinize the process. We did see some lines, not very long, but I would think in some of the cases that I visited, there perhaps would have been close to 20 persons in the line. But I didn't get the impression that any of them was growing impatient. They seem to have been waiting patiently. And the process for getting them into the polling station, checking their ID cards, and allowing them to vote was moving smoothly. We're going to continue for the rest of the afternoon, looking at the polling station, just seeing whether things continue to proceed on that track. And then we are going to be present at a number of the tabulation centers this evening after the votes. Well, we're going to be witnessing at as many polling stations as we're able to cover the actual counting of votes and the preparation of the statements of vote. And then we will move to the tabulation centers, as many as we can cover, to watch the tabulation process. We don't know how long that will take. We don't know how far into the night that will go. But we're going to drink some black coffee and stay there as long as we need to, because we want to see the process through to completion. So all told, I think the people of Guyana deserve to be congratulated on the peaceful, disciplined way in which they have gone out to cast their ballots. I think certainly the polling officials who are representing GCOM also need to be congratulated on the very professional way in which they have been carrying out their duties. And I expect that the rest of the process will attract the same kind of discipline, orderliness, and professionalism. So thank you very much, and I ask you to continue to give good coverage to this important exercise in Guyana's democracy.
Sir, are you able to compare what the mission has observed so far with the conduct of the poll in 2020?
Very similar. When we were here in 2020, at this stage of the game, things were moving orderly. We saw the same professionalism. We saw the party agents on the job. We saw lines, but we saw discipline. The problems that we observed in 2020 didn't have anything to do with the actual conduct of the poll. It had to do with the tabulation exercise, and only in Region 4, because the tabulation exercise in the other 9 regions proceeded smoothly without any difficulty. Region 4 was where the problem was. I am hoping, and I would put it even stronger than that, I don't anticipate a recurrence of that problem. There have been some amendments to the regulations regarding the tabulation process, and I expect that the tabulation will proceed smoothly. And I hope that as soon as a declaration is made, it probably won't be made today, probably not until tomorrow, by the time all of the various regions have tabulated, I hope that it will be a result that the people of Guyana are satisfied, represents the true and free expression of the will of the people.
Sir, have you come across any problem with persons with disability getting access to some of these polling stations?
What we observed was that persons with disabilities were given priority. In other words, they didn't have to stay in a line. They were allowed to go straight up to the head of the line. What I think would have posed a problem, and I didn't actually see a person with disability in that situation, but at some of the locations that we went, where polling stations were on the upper floor, persons who were physically unable to climb stairs would have had to be lifted up because there would not have been any other means for them to access the polling station. Wherever possible, to avoid locating.
That it can be faster throughout the country, because we want everyone to ensure that they can cast their vote before 6 p.m.
You were watching the newsroom. We had to discontinue that those comments from OS Observer Chief of Mission Bruce Golding there, because we want to go over to the media center of the Guyana Elections Commission. They are hosting a press conference on today's polls, which close at 6 p.m. The newsroom's Vishani Raghuber and Kurt Campbell are on location to bring us that press conference and to talk about what they have observed during today's elections.
A full day of activities across the country for elections in Guyana, the 2025 general and regional elections. Polls have closed, but the day is still not over yet. We're standing by right now for a press conference from the Guyana Elections Commission, the Secretariat of the Guyana Elections Commission. They are hosting a press conference from their media center, which is located at the Regency Hotel on Hatfield Street. The Chief Elections Officer will no doubt address us. We also anticipate to be at that press conference. The Deputy Chief Elections Officer, already present here this evening, is the Public Relations Officer, Yolanda Ward. And GCOM will in fact comment on the process as it unfolded today, and I anticipate that the GCOM officials will no doubt also address some of those arising issues, whether isolated or repeated. The newsroom has been providing comprehensive coverage of E-Day activities across the country. We are now going to turn our attention to the GCOM Secretariat to see what they have to say, and following that we will also continue to bring you coverage on the counting of ballots at the 2,790 polling stations across the country, but even beyond that, the tabulation at the returning officer's office, and then finally a declaration from the Guyana Elections Commission. But before we get to all of that, we will focus on how today unfolded. Joining me is my colleague Vishani Raghuber. Vishani, what are some of the issues that you encountered, people told you about, raised as concerns when you visited polling stations along the East Coast and as far as Region 5 and 6?
Sure. So we started first with coverage at the Pleasant Secondary School here along the east coast of Damar, where the presidential candidate of a Partnership for National Unity, Aubrey Norton, cast his ballot just the first thing in the morning. And immediately, one of the things he raised when he came outside to brief our reporters and offer some comments to reporters when he came outside was that he believed that the voting compartments weren't positioned in a way that allowed GCOM staff, polling persons, to adequately scrutinize whether persons were using their phones or not. Of course, you know that has been quite a topical matter over the past few weeks. The whole concern about persons photographing their ballots and then sharing that, which of course is illegal. So immediately, Mr. Norton, when he came outside of the Pleasant Secondary School after casting his ballot, he came outside and he told reporters he doesn't believe that some of the voting compartments were positioned properly, and he believes that those compartments should have been shifted in a way to allow a greater scrutiny on what the voters were doing, while still remaining, secrecy of the ballot, still giving them that space to cast their ballot in secret. We saw more of that
before
emerge.
you go on to the other issue, if I could just share my own experience, because to the contrary, where I voted at the Peters Hall Primary School earlier today, I felt like the voting compartment was positioned in such a way that too many of the agents and or GCOM officials in the polling station could have really seen into that compartment. So I think while we had the complaint that persons could not scrutinize what persons were doing in that compartment, there was also the scenario where they could have seen more than I believe they should have seen.
Right. So just to really, Mr. Norton came out and said it was his opinion.
Right.
Of course, we'll hear from GCOM pronouncing on that tonight. I know throughout the day we saw videos emerging on social media of persons visiting polling stations and raising that same concern. And they were, persons are divided on the matter, but of course GCOM is the authority.
Correct.
And GCOM has to tell us what transpired today and what remedies were put in place, if any. But of course we already knew that GCOM stated that they would position those compartments in such a way to allow for just greater scrutiny to see whether persons are using their phones or not. I think in terms of all the issues, from my coverage along the east coast of Demerara, then Region 5, and then in Region 6, there weren't any major issues reported. Something consistent that I heard was the slow voting process unfolding. A person said that perhaps not necessarily an issue, but just an observation that the processes were unfolding in a much slower manner than they are accustomed to. But on one hand, you heard that, but on the other hand, persons expressed their view that perhaps this was GCOM just being even more diligent in the execution of their duties. That would be the polling staff being even more diligent in the execution of their duties. So there's also that to consider, which is something we also expect GCOM to talk about. So
and today was in fact a holiday, so there was no need to rush to the polls for lots of persons.
Sure. So while we heard much of that, the process was unfolding smoothly in an efficient manner. And obviously some persons, based on the amount of people in the polling stations, would have had, spent various amounts of times, some longer than others. We did hear, at least I heard consistently from my reporting along the east coast of Demerara, Region 5 and Region 6, that in some instances the polling staff were executing their duties meticulously, diligently, and that might have caused some a slower execution of the process.
I understand. Vishani, I want to say that was particularly my experience also. We covered the District 3, Essequibo Islands, West Demerara. We covered District 3, the west coast of Demerara, the east bank of Essequibo, and the east bank of Demerara. And that's what we noticed. Really no long lines, but a steady flow of voters to polling stations. Particularly, we covered the close of polls in Region 4 this evening, and we saw a rush to the poll, I would say, which was quite unusual from what we were seeing throughout the day. But particularly important is one of the arising concerns that I encountered, or that persons came up to me complaining about, is that they could not find their names on the list. And I think that was quickly remedied. We'll have to turn our attention now to the actual press conference. GCOM is about to start a press conference, but we'll pick up from where we left off later. Sure. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, Guyanese, joining this live wherever you to all of you. My name is Yolanda, Relations Officer of the Guyana Elections Commission, and it is indeed a privilege to have you here joining us, whether at this GCOM Election Media Center this evening or from the comfort of your home or wherever you are. Indeed, it has been quite a long day, I'm sure, for you members of the media on the ground covering these elections has been quite a remarkable experience. So today across the country, the Guyana Elections Commission conducted general and regional elections. For us, the voting process has proceeded smoothly and peacefully across the country. They have been addressed promptly and transparently in accordance with the law. We remain concerned about the ongoing spread of misinformation and wish to provide clarity on some of the most common areas of confusion without naming or highlighting specific individuals or sources. The first issue I wish to touch on is the issue as it relates to Commonwealth ID cards issued to Bangladeshi nationals. I want to particularly emphasize that GCOM confirms that under Guyana's laws, Commonwealth citizens residing legally in the country for over 1 year are eligible to vote. The ID cards issued reflect the legal residency status and are valid for electoral purposes. May I pause here to emphasize that under the National Registration Act, where the electoral process actually begins from the point of registration, the eligibility for registration is that you must be a Guyanese citizen by birth, descent, naturalization, or a citizen of a Commonwealth country living in Guyana for 1 year or more. Once you are eligible and you have been registered, as you're fully aware, your information or your record is entered into the National Register of Registrants database. And at the time of an election, you are extracted onto an official list of electors. May I emphasize again that that is what the law provides for. It therefore means that once your name has been extracted onto an official list of electors, you are eligible to vote. The second thing I wish to raise in relation to matters circulated on social media today is as it relates to multiple nationals at one address. GCOM does not control living arrangements. In some cases, employees or agencies house temporary or contracted workers at single location. What matters is that the registration process was followed in compliance with the law. And I've explained this at point 1 as it relates to Commonwealth citizens. Throughout the day, we have seen the issue of the voting compartment facing inwards or outwards. As a matter of policy, and GCOM instructions are that voting compartments must be positioned to preserve voter secrecy. If any deviations were identified, presiding officers were empowered to immediately rectify them. I want to particularly note that where these matters were brought to the attention of our operations team, they were immediately addressed to the satisfaction of the candidates and agents at those respective polling stations. There was a matter as it relates to no ID card on polling day. Again, let me reiterate the legal provisions in relation to this. Persons without their ID card can still vote once their name is on the official list of electors. It is important to note that in such case, there is a procedure that must be followed. In such a case, they must answer security questions and may be required to sign an oath. This is in keeping with the Representation of the People Act. Another issue that confronted us throughout the day was a matter of name not found on the list, but persons claim to have voted before. The only valid reference is the official list of electors for this election. If a name is not on the list at a given polling station, that person cannot vote at that polling station. We have throughout all our public engagements prior to the conduct of these elections urged voters to always verify their registration details well in advance and of course knowing the polling station. To further supplement the process, we had information clerks placed across the country, particularly at polling places with several polling stations. We've received reports as well as it relates to police officers being stationed inside of polling stations. From us at GCOM, police officers are stationed outside of polling places unless their assistance is specifically requested by the presiding officer. This is consistent with electoral law and established protocol. Again, where these concerns were brought to us, they were immediately addressed. The big issue also that confronted us today was the concern of names of deceased persons seen on the list. Specifically, I point out here fouls and more. Names can only be removed from an official with an official death certificate submitted to the General Register's office. Without it, names may remain until the next list revision cycle. This is a legal safeguard to prevent wrongful removal. We have discussed this matter as it relates to the removal of deceased persons from the list, the process that GCOM, the legal process that GCOM engages in relation to how that is done, where we receive death returns from the General Register's office, and these flagging are done in accordance with the legal provision or during the claims and objections period where persons are permitted to make those objections. Of course, as you know, and we have published the multiple safeguards in place at polling stations to guard against any possible impersonation. There were some concerns as it relates to slow voting process at some stations. The feedback we've received from polling stations across the country was that the process was progressing smoothly and in accordance with GCOM's procedures. I want to particularly note that while minor delays may have occurred during peak periods, but all systems remain effectively functioning. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now at the point where I presume, if not all, most of our polling stations are probably closed and at the count. I'm saying probably because there is a provision in place that while the poll closes or should close at 6 p.m., that if there are electors in the line, it is the responsibility of the presiding officer to count the number of persons in the line, ask the police officer at that particular station to stand behind the last person and ensure that all those persons are attended to in accordance with that provision. I'm sure currently in the respective areas, statements of poll, where possible, where counts have been concluded, are probably en route toward the respective, whether deputy supernumerary returning officers or to the returning officers of the respective district. If you check on GCOM's website, that statements of poll gallery is already live, and so as those statements are delivered, you as well as the members of the public can access that gallery from the very comfort of their home and examine those statements of poll. This action is in accordance with the legal provision as amended by the Representation of the People Act, Act number 25 of 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, I pause here to say that throughout the day, generally from us at GCOM, barring the minor hiccups that we faced and adequately addressed, it has been a smooth day, and we look forward to the other operational procedures that will now take precedence in the next few hours. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite you to ask any questions or raise any concerns you may have. And of course, I know you've been in the field all day, and you may have a few for us here. I see many hands in this corner. Can somebody help us with a microphone, please? Kindly state your name and the media house you represent, and we'll take no more than 2 questions per person at a time.
Thank you very much, Travis Chase, HGP. Thank you, Ms. Ward, you and the Chief Elections Officer, even the Deputy Elections Officer. You keep talking about this rigorous process to probably avoid voter impersonation and so forth. And I want to specifically take you to what you mentioned about the wrongful removal from the list, specifically dead persons. What if, just if, GCOM finds that the dead have voted?
Travis, we've addressed that particular issue at length. Again, I want to take you back to the safeguards that we have in place. Operationally, we've done our part, and while these are allegations, again, GCOM does not have that investigative authority, but we've done what has been mandated of us to ensure that we have those legal procedures followed and implemented at the place of poll. Ms. Fowler?
Thomas.
Thomas.
Marcel Thomas, the Starbuck News. You spoke about the minor hiccups that GCAP had today, but I didn't hear address that the website had crashed, and this has been a problem throughout the day. Your GCOM officers themselves were frustrated at some of the polling stations. GCOM had given an assurance that it can handle the website traffic, and it was asked this pointedly. What happened? That's one. And two, recommendations for the provision of services for disabled persons were made since 2020. Today we had complaints and we saw firsthand some persons could not access polling places, some persons with disabilities. Again, what happened? That's my two questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas. I will start with the latter, and of course, rightfully so, to really apologize to the members of the disability community. I'm very cognizant that this is an issue that we continue to face. But again, what we are required to do legally in the operationalization or the placement of electors to polling stations within their respective divisions and subdivisions. And so in such a case, it mandates that unfortunately sometimes members of the disability community may be placed at a polling station that unavoidably does not have provisions such as ramps for them to access. What we've done is to ensure that we ask presiding officers as much as possible to offer the kind of assistance necessary to help those persons to cast their ballot. In relation to your first question, I'm fully aware of the issue of the up and down period of the website, particularly the query tool for the Finding Your Polling Station app. While we've experienced those issues, I think that our IT team was working on that round the clock to ensure that they put the necessary fixes in place and ensure that the system was live, up and running within the shortest possible time. We have continuously, throughout the day, and even now that we have launched that SOP gallery portal on our website, continue to ensure that we reassess and continue to monitor that website closely to avoid any possible such occurrence during the course of the night.
Swatlana Marshall, News Source. On the issue of power outages, we're seeing reports of power outages in various regions. Could you say how many polling stations have been affected by power outage and what are the implications for such? Marcel asked about disability because I was going to ask that, but we also received reports today about missing ballots, the wrong ballots being sent to polling station. I think Montrose was among communities listed. Could you address that? Is that true or not? And if so, what would have led to that?
All right, thank you very much for those questions, Svetlana. As it relates to the power outage situation, up to the time when I commenced this press briefing, I had not received such reports. However, what I can say is that we have put backup systems in place to address that. In addition to that, for the purpose of the count, we have provided all polling stations with solar lamps to facilitate that process. But in the cases where at the offices of the returning officers and supernumerary returning officers, there are backup systems in place to ensure that that upload and scanning process of those SOPs continue uninterrupted. I think your second question had to do with a mix-up of ballots at Montrose. I am not aware of the issue, but for me, once the ballot has not been issued and it has been recognized at the respective polling station, then I believe that it will not have any implication on the process.
In persons not ballot papers were issued to that particular station, would it have affected maybe the numbers of persons?
Right. I don't think it would ideally affect the polling station in relation to a shortage of ballots. There are provisions in place to address any such occurrence, but we've not received any such report. So as at this point, I believe that it's safe to say that voting proceeded very well at that location you're referring to, even though we've not received that kind of report.
Abina Rockcliffe, Guyana Standard. Can you shed some light on the Sophia Primary School incident? Did you get any report from the GCOM staff there?
So we have not received through the official channel a report. I have seen the circulation of a video on social media in relation to an incident at the Sophia Primary School. It is a matter that I will not want to address at this point in time without having all the facts in place. I'm sure at one of our follow-up press conferences when we have further details on that matter, we will be able to adequately address
You referred to an incident. There appear to be several incidents at that polling place. The one you're referring to that is circulating, and another late this afternoon about half an hour before the close of polls, when there was an altercation between the same parties, some claiming that persons were being offered contracts at the polling place, and another claiming that APNU agents were frustrating the process. And APNU agents claiming that PPP people were offering contracts to voters.
Right. Well, again, Abina, we have not officially received those reports from our team, and therefore I would not want to prematurely offer any comment on such a matter without having all the details on that. At the follow-up press conference, I'm sure we'll have some more details for you in relation to that.
Then Shabbat and Waves. I know you may not be able to give us a figure, but can you say, based on what you've been hearing from your colleagues, what has been the voter turnout like in terms of whether it was steady, slow, or any other description you feel is appropriate? And secondly, can you say why no proper testing was done of the query tool to avoid a crash of the website? This probably could have been avoided, some experts say, with the relevant testing and the purchasing of the necessary capacity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shibral. I like to deal with numbers. And so to prematurely tell you about turnout will be really a hit and miss. Our observation, what might work for you may not work for us, but from a GCOM standpoint, as the electoral management body, I prefer for us to look at numbers before we make such a pronouncement on turnout. As it relates to the query tool, I see present with us in the room this evening, we have the Information Technology Advisor from the UNDP, who has been offering support to GCOM in relation to its IT needs. And we've done a considerable amount of testing on the portal. And even now, as I mentioned, we continue to ensure that we monitor it closely. I think in the IT world, once some of these systems are crowded at a particular time, we may very well experience this kind of hiccup. And hence, that's why we've been urging persons way in advance to ensure that they use that tool to check their polling station. Again, it is unfortunate, but I think the work that was done by our technical team to ensure throughout the day that that did not remain for a long period is commendable, and that they've been able to quickly resolve those matters.
Ms. Ward, Julia Johnson, Prime News. I'm going to take you back to the inability of some people who are different promptly. And I'm saying this because I was at a polling station where I saw this firsthand. You spoke about the presiding officer being the person who would have been able to handle such things promptly. It did not happen, at least at the two incidents where it seemed as though people were looking for higher authority to allow these differently abled people to vote. That's one. Would you comment on that? What is the process employed there? And at my polling station, in fact, the gate to the outer building at 6:30, two of the polling booths were ready and on time or day. You did have people waiting there, but on the back, which I knew was in place for late opening when poll stations open late, there is a time back that is given to the voters. I know you're going to tell me about people being in the line at the close of poll, but I saw at least two people going into that specific polling station and being told that they closed at 6:50.
Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention, Ms. Johnson. Let me address the first issue again as it relates to dealing with persons with disabilities. GCOM has continuously been engaging I think it's the National Commission on Persons with Disabilities. And of course, we continue to receive recommendations in that regard. One of the issues that we face there, Julia, is the fact that these things, a lot of what may be required, needs legislation. And outside of that, we may not be able to implement some of those recommendations. Again, it's quite unfortunate that the training that our staff were given was probably not adhered to at those specific polling stations, because on the other hand, I've seen images, even witnessed at some polling stations today, presiding officers facilitating persons with disabilities. I don't know if those issues were resolved and those persons were able to eventually cast their ballots, but I will hope that that has happened, that whether the presiding officer then sought the guidance of their respective DROs and they were able to properly execute that task. That would be my hope that that has happened. As it relates to the late opening of the polling station, I am happy to report that maybe that was maybe a very small percentage where that may have happened. Again, I am not sure what might have been the issue that contributed to the late opening of poll. But in relation to the matter that the poll closed at 6:01, that is of concern to us, and I hope that you may be able to help us with that information in relation to that polling station. And this is something that we may have to look at because legally the poll closes at 6 and every minute counts in relation to that.
Samuel Sakanda, NCM News. Ms. Ward, have there been any major challenges with persons utilizing the Folian passport or the Folia loan?
We have not recorded any challenges. This is a legal provision in the amendment of the Representation of the People Act that caters now for persons to vote with a valid passport and a valid driver's license. Even outside of any form of identification, a voter, once they're listed on that official list of electors, they can vote without an ID card, without any form of identification, because there is a system in place to identify that voter. And as you rightly mentioned, the provision of the folio, to do that, it is what is the procedure, and I've not received any complaints and should not have any complaints in any voter being able to cast their ballot because they didn't have a form of identification. Of course, an oath of identity is administered to that person before they're allowed to proceed to cast their ballot. I see a question over here.
Hi, good night. Fiona Morrison, I'm from the Guyana Chronicle. I've seen on Facebook tonight some activists posting what appears to be copies of statements of poll and coming to their own conclusion. What is your appeal to the general public and to politicians in terms of them awaiting credible and official results?
Right. We have issued several appeals in relation to this matter. And again, for us at GCOM, I want to remind persons that GCOM is the only authority to release the election results. If you've noticed, we've even stayed away from preliminary results. And so I want to urge persons, and as you've mentioned, political parties, to desist from doing that. We want to ask persons in particular to rely on the tool that is legally provided for by way of GCOM's website to ensure that they follow from that tool and so that they're not misguided by what is published out there. So it is important for persons, particularly the electorate as a whole, to be only guided by what GCOM publishes in relation to any kind of results from these elections.
Hi, good night. Tamika Garnett from the Guyana Times. My first question is pertaining to a picture that was circulating of national cyclist or former national cyclist Alonzo Greaves posting a picture of his ballot. Would you be, I don't know if that's authentic, so you can confirm whether or not that was actually authentic. And would you say that GCOM did enough to prevent voters from taking their cell phones into light of the fact that we saw defiant voters during the discipline services voting, going in with their phones and taking pictures of their ballots? My next question is, we've seen a lot of reports circulating online of persons saying they went to vote, didn't have an ID card, were turned away, or they had conflicts with the presiding officers. At least one person was saying that they went to vote but was told that their name was ticked already. I don't know how authentic or not authentic some of these things are because, of course, fake news is common. But can you say what is the reporting mechanism or feedback mechanism that GCOM has available to citizens who would have encountered some issues at their polling station? What is the process for them to report to GCOM what happened with them at their polling station and what is the next step going forward after that? If I'm saying something happened, that prevented me, a valid citizen, from voting. How can I report this to GCOM, and what is the next step for me?
Thank you, Tamika. As it relates to your first question, again, GCOM does not have the requisite or has not been mandated with investigative capacity. And therefore, as it relates to the ballot circulating on Facebook, while it is alleged that it belonged to a certain person, GCOM does not know that. And therefore, anything as it relates to investigating the origin of that photograph lies in the hands of the police. You've also followed on with that question as it relates to whether GCOM has done enough to put the mechanism into motion as it relates to not allowing persons to enter the polling station with their phones on, off, whatever. I'm sure that as you traverse today, you would have noticed signs at the respective polling stations, and even prior to that, several notices by way of social media or in the newspapers, and even via your coverage as it relates to this matter. I have seen the placement of desks next to voting compartments for persons to leave their phones there. But we've seen, of course, the one issue. What I am happy about is that that issue has not been a widespread issue. And therefore, I believe that the message was clear and persons have really taken the opportunity to follow those procedures that we've placed in line. As it relates to the other question, as it relates to a feedback mechanism, you rightly started off that question as it relates to misinformation and disinformation. And so I will leave it right there to particularly note that we have to be very careful when we receive these reports, and therefore I'm sure that as citizens, if they have such concerns, then of course GCOM is always willing to listen and hear what those concerns were. But again, we have to be very careful with the level of misinformation and disinformation that are peddled in the public domain. Are there other questions?
Svetlana Marshall, news source again. Sorry, tired. But yes, following up on Tamika's question, would GCOM be requesting formally for the police to launch an investigation into these illegal acts of having those ballots photographed, or you're going to leave it open for them to make the first jump at the investigation? My second question has to do with the chairman of the Elections Commission. We noticed her statement last night. I don't know if anyone in the room saw her for the day, but could you brief us on her visits, where she was able to visit, her engagement with electors and things like that? I haven't seen her. I don't know about the other reporters, but I haven't seen her. And would she be engaging journalists at this crucial point?
Okay. Can you repeat the first question for me, Svetlana?
With regards
Would she come formally writing to the police requesting that the investigation launch into these illegal acts to have persons prosecuted?
or it would be up to the police to launch an investigation?
All right. I can properly respond to the course of action at the next press briefing, because of course I will not want to, I do not know the direction in which the Commission will handle this particular matter. And so until I'm guided by what the next steps are in relation to that, only then I'll be able to say whether GCOM will formally write to the police or whether the police will take the necessary actions on their own.
And the chairman?
So I am sure that at some point that the chairman will engage the media. Of course, you know that for the purpose of the declaration, that is a mandate that falls under the commission. I've been engaged for the entire day, of course, distributing ballots for intermixing. That's the disciplined forces ballots, and therefore I do not have a record as to where the chairman may have visited. I'm sure that she was out and about somewhere, but I'm sure that sometime throughout this period you may be able to have an engagement.
I'm just following up to the question. The chairman, substantive question. Could you say where the chairman was today?
I'm unable to provide that information.
But you know that she was somewhere.
Right.
Okay. My substantive question is, as we come to the end of this press conference here, one, is this the final press conference for today? And as it relates to final results, is it still the 4th as projected?
Okay. I think more than likely this, well, I should say this is likely to be our final press conference for this evening. As you know, we will have operations continuously ongoing, and therefore we would want to be engaged in those operations. But as I mentioned, the statement of poll gallery is live on our website, and therefore you can follow that gallery online during the course of the evening. But of course, if anything urgent arises, therefore, and we need to address that, it's more than likely that we can have one of this. I do not anticipate anything of that magnitude happening that will require us meeting in this space. But of course, this media center is open on a 24-hour basis, and therefore you're all welcome to stay, and you're all welcome to follow our website in relation to those SOPs. So more than likely our next press conference will be scheduled for sometime tomorrow.
Ms. Ward Travis Chase, you said you were involved in the intermixing of the discipline services balloting today?
Well, the dispatch of.
You're the dispatcher. You were also the logistical officer at GCOM?
No, Mr. Chase.
So isn't that the work of the logistical officer? Explain to me how that works, please.
Mr. Chase,
thanks.
These ballots are dispatched across the country, and therefore it requires the support of all in our operations to ensure that it is done in a timely and efficient manner. Of course, in the presence of political party agents and on the police escort, to ensure that we cover all the gazetted polling stations where those ballots were expected to be intermixed.
Ms. Ward, here I come again. Was the mixing discipline services ballots today? That's one. Two, spoke to the young lady on the other side of the room about the statements of poll being available on social media, but there is nothing that GCOM can do because those are posted, and if people them and post them, if an illegal act, as I am aware, would you say whether or not that has changed? And of course, the results we were told yesterday should be available on the 4th, and you did not definitively answer that a short while ago to Marcel. So I'm asking you again, thanks.
Julia, you're really trying to pin me down on that. And I don't want to be very malicious at this point in a very sensitive environment to say that the law permits us 15 days. But of course, as always, we understand the anxiety, and we have committed to delivering those results within the shortest possible time. And of course, taking into account all the legal provisions that are in place. When I say legal provisions, as it relates to the request for recounts, if there are requests for recounts and we have to facilitate those recounts, then it means it may shift those anticipated timeline. But of course, we want to ensure that this process concludes within the shortest time possible. Julia, as it relates to your question, as it relates to the statement of poll, I know when the young lady asks a question, she was particularly referring to a particular statement of poll. And I've just received a statement from the Chief Election Officer in relation to that particular statement of poll. And so, while it will be shared with this statement, will be shared with you after this press conference, I will take the liberty of reading this statement. It says, GCOM rejects the publication of fake statement of poll. The Guyana Elections Commission has noted the publication of a fake statement of poll at 1 minute past the scheduled close of poll. GCOM wishes to make it abundantly clear that it is impossible for the counting of the ballots at any polling station to have commenced. This despicable act can only be seen as creating a platform on which the political party associated with Team Mohammed Facebook page can create the impression that it has been successful at the polls. GCOM takes the opportunity once again to appeal to all stakeholders to accept only the results of the elections that are posted on GCOM's website in the form of statements of poll. 2, the official declarations made by the supernumerary returning officers and returning officers for the district and sub-districts respectively, and the national results to be declared by GCOM. The publication of fake results will be put to the Guyana Police Force for investigation. I will share this statement with you after this briefing ends.
Thank you, but you didn't answer the question on the discipline services ballots.
Sure. Thanks for the reminder, Julia. Again, I am not sure at the time of this press briefing what is happening operationally. Those ballots will either be detected during the process of the count, and so there is a system in place already to ensure that as soon as it is detected, that it arrives in the respective region to ensure that it is counted in that particular district. So that process, I'm sure, as it unfolds during the count, that we will be able to identify those ballots.
Ms. Ward, can you say what is the procedure from the time of the creation of the statements of poll to uploading? What could you run us through the process for GCOM, that is?
Right. So then it's the deputy returning officers. They're responsible for clusters of polling stations. And so
Once they've picked up those respective packages from the respective polling stations, it is then transported to the office of the supernumerary returning officer for the respective sub-district or the returning officer for the respective district, where those districts just have returning officers. Thereafter, the process will commence for the uploading of all those SOPs to the GCOM website. And once all the SOPs have been uploaded, it is only at that point the tabulation process will commence.
Do you know when the first SOPs will be uploaded based on what you've just said? You have a time frame?
I'm unable to tell you that. That is an operation that is ongoing in the field, and I will not have that information here at this point.
But what about for the least populated areas? Would it be easier for these to be done in a timely manner rather than compared to the densely populated areas of the country?
Right. So it may not always be about the population, but it has to also do with the terrain. And so while the population in a particular area may be very small, we also have to consider the terrain. And so again, those are other factors that we should also consider. What I can say to you then is our staff will be working around the clock. There's no stop, and therefore sometime throughout tonight I'm sure you can expect SOPs being uploaded to that portal.
You had a question, Mr. Chase? Oh.
With regards to the missing, the ballots that have not been accounted for, if those ballots are discovered tonight, hopefully they are, would the DCO be in a position to transport them to the respective regions
It must be done.
Or
it must be done.
Okay.
Pertaining to my earlier question about the mechanism for feedback, if a person, a citizen has a grievance or a question or a concern about what happened to them, I don't think I clearly understand how the voter is supposed to contact GCOM. Is there a hotline? Is there a section on the website? Where do I go as a voter who was aggrieved in my voting process? Where do I go at GCOM to lodge my report?
So we have the various layers: the supernumerary returning officers, the returning officers, chief election officer. So either of those persons can ensure that they reach out to. Again, Tamika, when you asked that question, it was with that note of misinformation, and I would hope that that was indeed the case, and those persons were able to cast their ballots today.
My final question has to do, I noticed, I figured that the DCO is listening to this press conference if he's the person who responded to the fake SOP. Now, why was it that he quickly responded to that and said that GCOM would request that a police investigation be launched into those fake SOPs? And we haven't seen the same level of commitment coming from GCOM with regards to investigating those persons who allegedly photographed their ballots, when this is something that happened first when the members of the disciplined forces went to vote, and happened again today. Why not that same level of commitment to having these issues investigated?
Thank you for your final question, Svetlana. And again, it's not the DCO, that was a statement from GCOM. And so you placed him in a difficult spot to respond to that particular question from GCOM. But I'm sure that it is something that tomorrow, at our next press briefing, we can further interrogate. So since that was Svetlana's final question, I don't see any other questions or hands raised in the room. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, first of all, I would like to take the opportunity as GCOM's Public Relations Officer to thank you for your cooperation and support in the fields today. You've been wonderful in your coverage, and I look forward to the same kind of support as we continue to cover these elections to the point of a declaration. It would also be very remiss of me to conclude this press briefing this evening not to, on behalf of the Commission, the CEO, and our entire operations team, to congratulate the people of Guyana who participated in this democratic process for being part of this very important exercise and a good day that we had in the voting process. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you more at this media center as we continue to engage over the coming days. Thank you very much, and have a pleasant evening.
Just looking to a post-polls press conference by the Guyana Elections Commission. Speaking there to members of the media and answering questions, the Public Relations Officer of GCOM, Yolanda Ward, and taking the liberty to address several issues arising from Monday's polls. The first at the top of her list at the press conference tonight was the voting by Bangladeshi citizens in Guyana, and Ms. Ward really clarifying that those persons are in fact citizens of a Commonwealth country, and according to the laws of Guyana, citizens of Commonwealth countries living in Guyana for a year or more can in fact vote in our elections, and that's once they are registered, and that makes them eligible voters once their names are extracted and placed on the official list of electors. So we saw some Bangladeshi citizens voting in the elections here today, but Ms. Ward clarifying that that was in fact totally lawful for them to do that. Also, the issue of a large number of persons being registered at one address. Ms. Ward also addressing that, saying that GCOM is not responsible for where persons are living and how they are registered based on the address. But by law, once the registration process has been followed, that those persons are eligible to vote, and she is satisfied that the registration process was followed according to the law. Several other issues addressed here at the press conference tonight, but I'll give my colleague, Ms. Raghuber, an opportunity to address some of these.
Sure, Kurt. So, of course, Ms. Ward delved into some of the issues that came up throughout the voting process that unfolded throughout today, but she also spoke about the what's next and the potential issues that can arise from that, and some of the issues that are already unfolding right now. So the first thing we'll talk about is the in very many polling stations across the country since polls closed at 6 o'clock this evening. And she pointed out that systems are in place to ensure that if there are any power outages or blackouts, as we call them here in Guyana, commonly, if there are any blackouts, there are systems in place to ensure that the counting can go ahead throughout the night. And then the counting, of course, leads to the tabulation. Now, she said the stations where ballots are being counted, there are solar lamps there to ensure that persons can see and continue counting the ballots. And then there are other backup systems, and she only said backup systems in place at other offices, including the offices for the returning officers. Now, previously, the chief elections officer, in an engagement with members of the media, said that some of those offices would have generators in place so that in the event of any power outage, in the event of any blackout, those individuals would still be able to receive these statements of poll, or SOPs for short, engage in a tabulation exercise, and also, importantly, scan and upload those SOPs so that they can be shared online on GCOM's website. Which brings me to my second point, the second thing that Yolanda raised. Now, she discussed what she described as misinformation online, or perhaps disinformation even, with what seems to be fake SOPs circulating online, and she made particular reference to one SOP shared by a popular Facebook page that is linked to one of the contesting parties, noting that it appeared as though that SOP was posted just 1 minute after the close of polls, and she said that's virtually impossible for the ballots to be counted and the SOP completed just 1 minute after the close of polls. So what Yolanda, and by extension GCOM, is stressing is that you use their website, that's the GCOM website. They have an SOP gallery where they are expected to, they are supposed to upload every single SOP from every single polling station all across the country. What I can tell you now, at 8:37 p.m., just about 2.5 hours after polls have been closed, I don't yet see an SOP uploaded to the website. However, we have been assured that throughout the night those SOPs will be uploaded as they are received.
Right. Vishani, if I could comment now. We also spoke to Commissioner of the Guyana Elections Commission, Sept Raj, earlier, and he assured us that those SOPs will start to be uploaded tonight within a matter of hours. But just to get back to the press conference with Yolanda, several other issues addressed. She addressed issues with persons not finding their names on the list. She addressed issues with how voting compartments were placed, whether inward or outward, but again stressing that GCOM was satisfied in the end that the secrecy of the ballot was protected, and also that GCOM responded to party agents or whoever raised concerns. GCOM responded swiftly, and GCOM responded to the satisfaction of those persons. I just want to point out two key other concerns: an apology flowing from GCOM tonight to the disabled community, as Yolanda worded it, saying that, acknowledging rather, that in some cases at some polling stations, whether public buildings or private residences, persons with disabilities were not able to access polling stations. And Yolanda also providing some assurances that those persons were accommodated in one way or another. Presiding officers were empowered to accommodate those persons, even though they could not make their way into the polling station. But also importantly, Ms. Ward addressing, and the second issue is escaping me, I don't know why.
Sure. But in the meantime, let me just jump in on the apology to persons with disabilities who went out to vote today. Now, this is particularly important, and we should not invisibilize their difficulties voting today, but also the support that they would have received despite certain systems not being placed. And I'll say this because I visited Mahaica today. As you know, we reported from all across the country today here at the newsroom.
Right.
In Mahaica, in the Old Road Mahaica, as they call it, Helena number 1, there was a particular polling station there where it was a building that had a step up before you can get into the voting area. And there was a man who was on a scooter and he had one of his legs cut off. And so he was unable to come off his scooter because he didn't have crutches. He was unable to come off his scooter and go into the polling station to cast his ballot. And like I mentioned before, he was on a scooter. So what happened, as you mentioned, and as Yolanda mentioned, certain officers, certain GCOM officers there were empowered to do what they could to ensure that no one is disenfranchised. So what I saw for myself there was that that individual on his scooter, officers came out, they put planks down, and they allowed him to go up those planks with his scooters. Of course, staying on the side of him to ensure that he doesn't wobble off of those planks. Not an ideal situation, certainly not an ideal situation. But it is on the point that there was support provided, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that these issues should be invisibilized. These issues are important, and as she acknowledged tonight, these are things that should be addressed by the Commission.
Right, and it's something that I've been speaking about all day, Vishani, that I've observed, and I've coined it as the spirit of the community. What I've noticed beyond disabled persons, shut-in persons, I've seen and I've spoken to persons who told me that they've gone to the homes of persons who were shut in, could not come out, placing them into their private vehicles and bringing them to polling stations to vote. And I am now remembering the second issue, voter turnout. A big topic today because of the calm that we experience, because of the orderliness that we experience. I don't know if you saw long lines. I did not see long lines. But Yolanda saying, Ms. Ward asking the citizenry in the country to not try to predict the voter turnout, but to wait on the official figures from the Guyana Elections Commission to determine what that turnout was today. And that's not going to come tonight. It may not come tomorrow or in the days ahead. But once GCOM has completed all of its processes, it will be able to pronounce on that issue.
Yeah, sure. So I think a key message, a consistent message from Ms. Ward throughout her press engagement here tonight was just asking the public and asking even members of the media, though it might not work out as she wants it to just be patient and to just rely on GCOM for all the sources of communication going forward. That would include the SOPs, any declarations, any information that's needed for the public. She cautioned persons against following what appears to be misinformation online. She urged persons to safeguard themselves from that. And again, just really honing down on the fact that follow GCOM. Follow GCOM for the official, credible sources of information. Importantly, she did not have answers to all of the questions posed to her tonight. Of course, things are still unfolding. Polls closed just about 2.5 hours ago. Information is still coming in from far reaches of this country. But she has committed to engaging with the media subsequently, if not tonight, in the days ahead, and also coming back with answers to some of those questions and coming back to address some of those matters once she has engaged the GCOM as the Secretariat and GCOM as the Commission.
Right. Vishani, our viewers can find more information on what came out from this press conference on our website, www.newsroom.gy. But of course, as you said, follow GCOM. I think this is the final press conference for tonight, but GCOM will continue to provide updates through the media on its website, and of course, they can follow the newsroom.
For sure. So that's our website, www.newsroom.gy, and across all our social media pages, because we've been quite active across every social media platform, Newsroom Guyana.
Thank you so much.
You're watching the newsroom, and this has been our live coverage of Elections Day activities all across Guyana. Now that polls have closed, what remains is the counting and tabulation of ballots cast in these elections. And of course, we will be following that count and that tabulation process very closely, and we will bring you live reports, as Vishani and Kurt have been saying, also on our website, newsroom.gy, and on our social media pages. So you can continue to check those platforms for the latest updates. Of course, if there's something particularly significant, we will bring that to you live. I'm Neil Marks. Take care.